This week's episode was brought to you by Jenica Cruz, Georgina Robinson, Jake Childs, VV, Windshield Wiper, Analog, and Devin. Wow. All I can say is thank you. It's subscribers like you that keep us going. Without you, our dreams would be lying broken on the floor. And by ours, I mean mine. Special shout out to Dot Darling. Please check out her video, What is Thelema? Occult 101. It really is the straight dope. Do check it out. This week's show, it started a bit ambitious as I had some guests lined up to have a talking discussion about the zeitgeist and maybe get into a screaming fight. But because of scheduling complications, I couldn't even get Mr. Horse to show up. So pour yourself a tall glass of vodka because it's only my voice this week, folks, and you're gonna need it as we explore the wheel of the sky and the astrotheology of the ancients. Thank you and enjoy the show. Oh, this is like the school of Athens if only one person showed up and they had to have a Socratic seminar with just themselves. It's really just a lonely psychopath obsessed with the esoteric, speaking into a black, abyssal, Pandoric box of no human reaction. But with that in mind, hello everybody and welcome to the Whole Rabbit, where we're not just doomed to repeat history. We ride that spiral to the center like an epileptic Alex Gray fan who licked one too many toads, because this week we're discussing the great wheel in the sky. And by wheel, I mean ecliptic. And by we, I mean me, your host, Luke Madrid, the infamous one. He who has slithered out from his crevasse of loathing to educate the wisdom-thirsty masses here assembled in our orbital grove of sacred and blasphemous mysteries alike. Now, I too am someone who uses the internet, and did in fact see the Call of Duty reveal trailer featuring Yuri Bezemov, the KGB defector, who at the height of the Cold War set out to reveal the plan of the Russian secret intelligence, the KGB, to subterfuge America by inserting itself into our social programs, our media, and our way of life, culminating with an ultimate disaster that would bring about the end of our democracy and all freedom as you and I know it. It's not really clear if this was just viral marketing or some kind of massive troll, but it did get a lot of people's attention. And if you listen very closely, from behind his twisted, questionably sincere smile, Yuri Bezemov warns his audience that if we do not learn from history, we are in fact doomed to repeat it. So in my attempt to have a Socratic seminar about the zeitgeist, I found myself alone and researching as far back into history as I could to discover and express the cycles that we most commonly refer to as the ages. Wow, that's vague. And it should sound vague because what the heck am I talking about? There's lots of different timelines and clocks to orient history to, but perhaps the oldest of all of them is the Great Clock, the wheel in the sky, which is essentially constructed of the sun, the earth, and, well, the background stars, which we are told were the imaginative mirror of the ancestors, where they would reflect upon their own gods and stuff. You know, it's important, the stars. Have you ever looked at the sky? It's kind of nice when you can see it. But despite the trolling of modern astronomers who hate and loathe all forms of spirituality, especially in the form of astrology, which they cannot even be bothered to start looking into, which would have just been considered a normal education back in the day, knowing about your own mythologies from your own culture, we have to rely on black magicians and wizards with strange proclivities, like the great Lon Milo Duquette, who is a great favorite of mine and has instructed and taught me a great deal in the art of the tarot, if only through his textbooks and a handful of lectures that I have been lucky enough to attend. So, in the spirit of advancing towards the age of Aquarius and understanding this trope as something perhaps more than just the manifestation of an overzealous KGB initiative to get Americans to drop out of school and put strange substances in their mouth day after day until they become gibbering, ranting lunatics of soft, fluffy lunacy. No, there has to be something more to this age of Aquarius, because gosh darn it, we all feel it in our loins that the times are a-changin', and it's not just because rock and roll is awesome. No, it's because there's a new age that is dawning upon us. Well, what the heck does that mean? What does that even mean, Luke? The age of Aquarius. That's just some silly astrology thing that chicks are into. Well, no, it's not, okay? So let's get into it. Since time immemorial, humankind has measured its progress against the starry wheel in the sky, and like the wobbly wheels of our lives, so too does the bowl of the firmament suffer dukkha and wobble. It does this because the Earth does not spin perfectly on its axis. It wobbles slightly. To get an image of this, imagine a top spinning almost perfectly. Anyone who has played with a top knows that getting a spin is nearly impossible, and the toy tends to dance around, sweeping out little circles. The Earth does the exact same thing, just very slowly from our perspective. Scientists call this the precessional rotation, but we could just say it wobbles. Specifically, it wobbles once every 25,920 years. This is known as the Great Year. It's called the Great Year not because it's a lot of fun, but because every 2,160 years, the wobble sweeps through another 30 degrees of the sky, giving us 12 distinct houses which neatly fit our zodiac. The system of measurement is the position of the sun against the background stars at the vernal equinox. What's the vernal equinox, you say? It's the day when the night and daylight hours are equal following winter, and in Western astrology corresponds to the first day of Aries and the first day of spring. It's the day when you can balance the egg on itself. That's actually a thing. All of the cardinal signs are arranged this way, and they correspond to the Earth's relationship to the sun and its yearly changing of the seasons. Cancer always ushers in the summer on the longest day of the year. Libra on the autumnal equinox to usher in fall. Capricorn during maximum darkness, returning again to Aries in the spring. This is why, and there will not and never will be, 13 signs in the tropical astrology. That is the one we're familiar with here in the West. Why are there two systems? One keeps track of the stars behind the sun. This is called sidereal. The other one keeps track of the sun's relationship to the earth, which is like the seasons. That's called tropical. Why are there two seasons? It's because they were implementing during the age of Aries when they both were perfectly aligned. That's why supposedly Aries is the first sign. So it's important to note that the great year proceeds through the zodiac backwards, meaning that the next great age is that of Capricorn. Great. That's how we know Carl Jung on the first page of Liber Novus is discussing the age of Aquarius, as his giant hand-painted typeface D includes the image of the sun moving backwards through the zodiac into Aquarius. So in short, Jung was writing about the dawning of the age of Aquarius long before it was cool, and to be honest, I did have to unleash a black plague of occultism just to explain that. Well, Luke, what does it all mean? It means that each age has a different feeling, a different context, a different meaning, like the months of the year. Ever notice how October just feels different than, say, March? It's like that. So let's get into it, shall we? Let's take a look at the different ages as described by the illustrious Lamau Duquette, beginning with the opposite pole of Aquarius, the age of Leo. The age of Leo occurred from about 11,000 BC to about 9,000 BC. So the age of Leo was seeing the end of the Ice Age, and the Neanderthals were on their way out. Advanced hunters of Europe were fashioning little Barbies that we know as Venus of Willendorf, handheld-sized little statuettes of the goddess, the personification from which all life comes: vegetation from the earth, babies from the womb, milk from the teats, animals from the hunt. Her consort was the hunter king, who understood the goddess best, the one who understood her cycles, rhythms, the one capable of subduing the great symbols of power, the devouring beasts of the field, whose body nourished the clan with the primal strength and abstract virtue of the animal. As the quality of the hunt depended on the hunter king, this intimately tied the vitality of one's people to the vitality of the king. As such, it was logical to consume the hunter king to attain his power if he were to be mortally wounded, sacrificed during the hunt. Perhaps even the willingness to participate in this ceremony suggested an intimacy and strength in itself. It may also be considered the only suitable replacement for the current hunter king as one who is by virtue stronger and more intelligent. It can be assumed then that proving through the virtue of mortal combat was really the only way to prove it. And well, what's the deal? What does it have to do with Leo? Just watch Lion King. So, as we'll see, with the changing of the ages, the solar deity expresses itself differently. Its virtues change a little bit, evolve little by little. Students of the tarot might consider the Hebrew letter associated with strength. Card Atu 11 is represented by the Hebrew letter Teth, which means serpent, and whose glyph closely resembles both the symbol of Leo and the Aries serpent, which was, by the age of the ancient Egyptians, synonymous with the crown of kingship. Why? One explanation may be gleaned from observing the goddess that the symbol all by itself represents. Her name is Wadjet and is depicted in anthropomorphic form as a cobra-headed goddess who protects and goes forth before the king Horus. Mythologically, she works for Isis as her nurse, while both she and Horus are on the lam hiding from their tyrannous, bloodthirsty uncle Set, who's paranoid that one day he'll lose his kingship to his now vulnerable infant cousin. As we've discussed before on the show, the mind of the Egyptians was a bit more amorphous, and it was understood that Wadjet was sort of like an aspect of Isis. Well, what does the snake have to do with Isis? Well, unlike the mortal king, who raises up to a certain level of strength and then eventually dies, Isis issues from the eternal realm of the stars, which can be understood to be the abode of the ancestors, of the gods, and of the collective place where all things go when they die. She was the realm of eternity that was ever renewed, just like the snake, who was long held to be immortal through his shedding skin. And it doesn't hurt that the best hunter had to be able to see snakes. In fact, some people believe it's the only reason evolutionarily that we can see colors. As such, the snake was a powerful confluence of symbols between power, leadership, revelation, deadliness, strength, nature, and wisdom, sort of just all combined. And by the time we got to the age of the Egyptians, it went forth before the king and represented his ultimate power. That even though he mortally may not have been immortal, his mind and his power was, and that he issued forth from the eternal realm. And so this coiled snake around the head, that is now the symbol of Leo, is our archetypal symbol of the crown of kingship. That, if you don't believe me, just go watch Lion King. Just go watch Lion King anyway. I don't care. Moving on to the age of Cancer. Not the age where we use cell phones too much, but this is 8,830 BC to 6,664 BC. And the age of Cancer saw humanity begin settling into homes to facilitate the growing of crops. Students of tarot may consider the Hebrew letter associated with this card in the deck as Chet and means fence. The establishment of homes and boundaries. White picket fence, anyone? Even the development of vessels of holding like clay pots, not unlike the womb of Cancer, and giving the ability to convey something somewhere else like a chariot, became central to development of society in this period. From here we move to the fanciest age, the age of Gemini. The concept of having a place to store your stuff and the means to convey it ushered in an age of trade and the necessity for codified systems of communication. The twins or lovers can easily be seen as a relationship entered upon contract between two individuals for the mutual expansion of the whole. The agreement is maintained by force, or the sword, which is two-edged and to which only the pen or language is mightier than. At some point along the way here, the consort of the goddess was now being depicted as a boy, a sacrificial victim, riding a bull or another beast, which symbolized nature being harnessed but not mastered or domesticated yet. By the end of this period, The bull was a ubiquitous symbol of the goddess and her sacrificial male consort. If I was being sponsored by an energy drink, this would probably be a good place to talk about it. But since I'm not, I will say that the latest game I'm playing by Hideo Kojima, Death Stranding, does feature some pretty fancy cross-marketing that includes an energy drink that makes use of the Hebrew letter associated with the sign of the next age we're going to discuss, the Age of Taurus, which occurred from 4,498 BC to 2,332 BC. So this is starting to be more recorded history as we officially understand it. So eventually the goddess's hold on the racial imagination would wane, and with it the rise of the male, solar, patriarchal priest would follow. Cue the imperial march music. This reflected the tarot as the male priest, pope or hierophant, whose Hebrew letter is Vav, which enumerates to 6 and means nail. 6 has long been associated with the sun and still serves as the basis for our clocks today. This makes some sense if we consider the seasons, both great and small, correspond to the relative position of the sun that links, like a nail, the earth through the ecliptic to the 12 classical signs of the zodiac. Even today, we have 12 months and our clocks work on a 60-base system divided into 12 o'clocks. Even our basic understanding of the circle is linked to the number 6 and 360 degrees, which make up a circle and can be represented as 6 times 60. To take this even further, the number 6 corresponds to Kabbalistic Tifereth, or the sphere of the sun, whose glyph is the circle of Nuit, or infinity, with a point, or in this case, an axial nail driven through the center like a wheel, giving it expression through its revolutions. When manifestation is withdrawn, the point is removed and the eternal circle of Nuit is left. It is important to note that within this time period, the ascending patriarchs began feeling put upon by the promise of being dispatched in the field at the end of their term, and as such began the practice of offering up children, often a male virgin instead of themselves, to assure the continuity and virility of the kingdom. If you're curious about certain hungry solar bull gods that demand child sacrifice, here is not a bad place to start looking. One need only be reminded of the sacrificial pyramid scene in The Shining, where Jack ascends climbing after his wife Wendy in a rage, being struck by the sacrificial bat right as the circular chandelier begins to crown him. His blood is spilled as he tumbles down the pyramid. While researching this section, I found numerous commentaries that described this as a backlash against the matriarchy, and that the kings who now were offering up their sacrificial sons or virgins or just members of the population had been put upon by the matriarchy to be killed at the end of their term for so long that now they were in a position to punish and to basically run amok. And I think it goes without saying that some of these themes are certainly explored in The Shining, and then again in Dr. Sleep. I mean, look who ends up getting sacrificed to the big steaming brass bull at the end. Huh? Who is it? Really, think about it. So, moving on now to the Age of Aries. This is about 2,332 BC to 166 BC, and the motifs of the patriarchs sacrificing their kids in the emblematic tale of offering up animal sacrifice in its stead is well reflected in the tale of Abraham, who, before sacrificing his son Isaac, is stopped by the angel and shown a ram who has snagged itself in some thorns and is given in its stead. In this way, the sacrificial victim moves from being a harnessed wild beast to a domesticated animal whose purpose is explicitly to be sacrificed for the benefit and comfort of the human. So as you can see, the role of the sun and its expression and its death is constantly being changed throughout the churning of the ages. So we see in this period the rise of the warlike nation states, which proclaim laws and establish courts and systems, beginning with Moses, moving through Hammurabi, and ending with the largest military bureaucracy as ever known, the Roman Empire. Considering the Aries pole is linked with Libra, the explosion of war technology elicited the capacity to enforce large bureaucracies, and systems of government. It was in this period that the Upanishads appeared, and minds like Pythagoras, Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle appeared within 200 years of each other. Near the end of the period, Lao Tzu, Zoroaster, Buddha, and Confucius would all exist in just a 100-year time span. It seemed like a lot of violent badassery, though, does go back to this period. I won't talk about the Hebrew letter association because occultists like to argue whether it's Sadi, the hook, or Hey, window, but the association with the warlike emperor and the rams behind him with the domesticated sheep at his feet make a good bit of sense considering the rest of our conversation. And that brings us to the age of Pisces, which starts at 166 AD and leads us pretty much right up to the present moment in 2000 AD. In this era, we saw the image of God transformed into the likeness of the sacrificial lamb and manifested in the cult of the Virgin by way of codified religious asceticism and abstinence as the only true path to the divine. La Milo Duquette relates the Hellenistic myth of Aphrodite and her son Eros transforming into a fish, tying their tails together and descending into the Euphrates to avoid their bloodthirsty uncle Typhon, as a suitable allegory of the sensual and natural impulses repressed during this period, and consequently only driving them deeper into the embedded subconscious mind stream, erupting in said patriarchal cults of virginity and amorous traditions of courtly love. Gross. Thankfully, we're now moving into the age of Aquarius, which shares its pole with Leo, the lion, thus completing one half turn of the great year, at least for this episode. We're still in the dawning of the age of Aquarius, so your guess is as good as mine as to how these energies will evolve and carry our practical, theological understanding to the next level. One clue may exist in the tarot, which supposes a link between the star goddess Nuit of Atu 17 and the serpent lion beast of lust or strength, exceedingly relevant symbols to both eschatological Christianity and emergent Thelema. So when a bunch of servants of the serpent and of the star start jabbering about immanentizing eschatons and bringing about new aeons, this is precisely what they're talking about. As such, modern devotees of Babylon and other such blasphemous archetypes chalk up this bad press to being envisioned as the archetypes that bring about the end of the old age of Pisces. As La Milo Duquette says, the god of one age becomes the devil of the age to follow. The priest looks forward to the coming age and sees only the end of the world. So while it's fun to talk about beasts and hoes of Babylon, we can look at the symbolism of these two cards and get some sort of an idea as to what I think these energies might mean and to how we're supposed to work with them. For instance, we do know that the star, Atu 17, follows Trump 16, which also kind of sounds like an election, strangely, but it corresponds to a time of great destruction, which leaves all of everything cleared out, and you can see the starry night sky again. All the light pollution of the tower has been cleared away. The star is a woman standing above a clean, glassy pool of water that presumably, depending on what you think its association might be, if it's hey, which means a window, it can mean a window to the stars. Once one's emotions are clear or clean, they become a receptor or a reflector to the infinite wisdom of the starlight of the higher realms. We're going to move into a time where we have to allow Eros and Aphrodite, the forces of love and sensuality, to rise up out of the waters. This is part of the Revelations imagery of the dragon and the rising out of the water with its numerous heads. And this is symbolism used in Thelema as well. But the concept is that we have to come to peace with our infinite and our star-bound nature. And as the Eros begins to rise in us, we ought to ride it and ascend with it, but master it in the same way that we see the goddess doing in the lust and the strength cards of the tarot. So it's a bit of an inversion of what it was the other great half year ago, where you basically become the eternal king and the star if you are the beast and if you are aware of the goddess and you tame the beast and tame the goddess. like externally, then that makes you the king. But this is inverted and flipped, so you have to conquer your own inner beast and become your own inner king, but not be like a douchey douche about it, which actually is kind of a bit harder than it sounds. At least that's my 2 cents on the Aquarius and Leo energies that we supposedly are going to be bound to according to great magical occultists of many stripes and colors, especially Thelema. And this is where I need to open up and be a little bit more emotionally vulnerable, especially before I run out of material for this show, because it gets kind of depressing and negative at this point when you consider that if you look at the world from the age of Pisces, or if you look at the world from an older perspective, we are living in the end times. It's total chaos. Nothing good is happening. And we're all just waiting for the scorpions to sting us in our genitals for, like, you know, I don't know how long these dispensations are, but it doesn't matter if you're Christian or Hopi. Well, we're actually going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some Central American ideas of what the end of the world is like. But first, before we do that, we have to address this never-ending desire to put the end of the world just 6 months away so we could sell some more books. And I participated in it, this whole 2012 Baktun 13 end of the Mayan calendar scenario. In fact, I even threw parties to celebrate it, and I would do it again. But that's a story for a different podcast. What I want to talk about is how actually the date, the popular one for 2012 and Baktun 13, that's actually an accurate date. I thought that was hilarious. So without further ado, let's take a look into it. The Hopi, who cohabitated and traded with the Maya, shared in the belief that we exist in the fourth world, having arisen from the ashes of 3 destroyed worlds. The first world was destroyed by fire. The second world was destroyed by ice, and the third world was destroyed yet by a great deluge. All 3 of these scenarios will seem somewhat familiar when one considers the geological record of supervolcanoes, asteroid impacts, ice ages, and the near ubiquitous mythology of the flood from Gilgamesh to the Old Testament. Likewise, the Hopi also make use of the Mayan long count calendar, which we have to thank for the 2012 end of the world new age fad scenario that I just discussed. So, as I discovered, oddly enough, even though our modern interpretation of the Mayan calendar might be technically wrong, shrouded in native mythology and lost oral tradition, technically, like I said, the date was right. December 21st, 2012 corresponded to a great cycle in the long count calendar, which is known as a Baktun, this being the 13th. Now, before I go off the rails pretending to know what I'm talking about, I was able to ascertain that the cultures who used the long count calendar did not consider us to be in the 13th Baktun, the same way we would consider ourselves to be in the 21st century. This seems a bit counterintuitive until you learn that the entire long count calendar technically has more than 112 on the left that switched over to a 13. The entire long count includes 19 13s before it. What? So when you're seeing Baktun 13, you're used to seeing it represented as 13.0000, which is pretty cool, but it actually should read 13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13.13. of close to 2013, now that I said that out loud, which is bizarre. So to make things even more confusing, the Hopi stopped using the long count calendar of 394-year cycles at some point and started using the Zolkeen calendar of 260 days, which is also pretty darn complicated itself. This is the system which we discussed with the mythologies of Zolchi, the Lady of Flowers, and her replacement Mayahuel. Boy, I'm sure I said that wrong again. But these are the mythologies that many different South American native tribes found as sacred and intershared and changed their myths, changing them around as time went on as well. Currently, the Hopi perform annual rites and ceremonies in alignment with the Tzolk'in calendar cycles. As such, the Hopi people rely on their dwindling numbers of elders who possess undiluted yet fragmentary pieces of the old oral tradition from the before times when the long count calendar and its mysterious ways were better understood. It's not unlike the Judeo-Christian culture, which in Matthew 24:36 says, "But of the day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only." Referring, of course, to the end of the world. Although, much like in Christian prophecy, the Hopi have some predictions that signal the end times are coming or might even be here. Some of the prophesized earth changes include earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, tornadoes, record flooding, wildfires, drought, and famines. Pandemics are also something that we should look out for, supposedly. This article that mentioned the pandemics goes back to 2014. It seems a bit laughable now that we won't go there. So the Hopi also predicted a number of technological changes that would signal the end of the fourth world. Long before it happened, the elders said that a gourd of ashes would fall upon the earth. Everywhere I read, it seems to refer to, or at least they think it does, nuclear explosions. The first atomic test blast at the Trinity site in New Mexico, then the dual Holocaust at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, finally the other hydrogen bomb tests in the Pacific atolls in the American Southwest with their carcinogenic effects on the downwinders. The Hopi couldn't help but see their prophecies come to truth in the giant mushroom cloud of the nuclear bomb. Hopi prophecies include the fact that people would ride in horseless wagons on black ribbons. This was obviously referring to Death Stranding. In addition, aerial vehicles would travel roads in the heavens, pathways in the sky. And this can be seen like just with contrails. It just looks like paths in the sky. Am I reaching here? I don't think so. People ride around the sky all the time. The Hopi also stated that one of the final signs is the people would be living in the sky, like in the International Space Station. Is that really so bad? People living in the sky? Is that so bad? Because if NASA knows about the prophecy, then they be trying to have someone in space 24/7 all the time. And this does set up an immediate archetypal, psychological God versus Satan, the old versus the new mentality. It just creates it right there. So I have some sympathy for this, for the veneration of blasphemous gods and satanic archetypes, simply because of the idea that the gods change. I don't know if some people are ever going to be open to this, just like some people are never going to be open to the idea of a space station or colonizing space or colonizing Mars. I mean, ask your friends. If you could get cyborg enhancements, that would make you superhuman. I'm sure a number of them would be like, I won't do it. I mean, I'm sure some of these same friends are very obediently wearing their masks now, but let's say you could have a cyborg mask that you could breathe underwater and even have laser eye implants. So if you had something like a pest problem, like flies or fleas or moths or hummingbirds, you could just shoot them with your eyes and they would fall down to the ground, vaporized before even touching the floor, leaving no mess behind. Ask those same friends, would you want this kind of power? I'm sure some of them would look at you just like a Hopi native and say, you know what, buddy? You can take your space station and your thelema, your little satanic laptops, and you can shove them up your giant satanic bum because I am perfectly happy just drinking water and reading the Bible while shucking corn and digging holes all day, because that's what life is all about, friendo. But, you know, not all of us see it that way. So, frankly, maybe we
should ride that candlestick to the stars and establish a colony that deals with its problems through orgiastic rituals that actually screw away all our identity politics in a big cloud of, well, I can't think of any more adjectives that won't get me deplatformed, so we'll just have to move on and stop avoiding what the Hopi have to say about the end of the world. So let's move on. There exists a Hopi prophecy rock, which seems to depict the creator of the Hopi people and a path for them that eventually diverges into a path of two hearts and a path of one heart. I don't think this has anything to do with Kingdom Hearts, but some of the motifs are similar. The path of two hearts is the false path of wickedness, imbalance, and death, summed up in the phrase Koya Niskatsi, and it means life out of balance. In fact, there's a visual documentary of this title, which is somewhat well known and has a soundtrack composed by Philip Glass. This was the primary inspiration behind the original Grand Theft Auto 4 trailer. And in short, if you really think about it, Grand Theft Auto 4 is a giant satirical exploration of the mental inanity of the North American civilization, whose primary character has always been designed to be the game's setting. I mean, if you look at, man, Red Dead Redemption and Grand Theft Auto exist in the same universe. You're meant to see the degradation of the land and the natural resources. You're meant to see life come out. Am I spoiling the whole series for you? I certainly hope I am, because it's worth having a look. There's even cave paintings. So this is something that is woven into our psyche. This is the sort of stuff that we talked about in The Shining. Have we moved ourselves too far into the technological, too far away from nature? Because I'm a fan of the space station and technology and stuff. So accepting this whole way of looking at the world unfiltered is really hard for me. But I did recognize that even the works of John Titor, whether he's a hoax or not, I'm just going to assume he's not. He's an actual time traveler. And when he was posting his BBS posts, he predicted most ardently. And before this disaster that just happened, I didn't really understand it, but the inhabitants of his timeline would come to see the outsourcing of food growth and basically the way we treat food as a level of insanity, and that we would come to see health, our immediate community, and our sources of food as the most important things in our lives. And the way we treat those things with abandon now would just be crazy to them. This actually reflects some of what the Hopi predicted. I just don't ever foresee myself wanting to abandon my dreams of having a robust and powerful space station where I can listen to Don McLean over and over and over again. Maybe they're right. Things are starting to look a little bit crazy. But so too are the conditions of the womb before a baby is born. It starts to get pretty cramped in there, and mom is getting pretty sick and tired of you being in there. I've heard it's like carrying around an oven inside of you, and if you happen to be a summer baby, mom is getting awfully sick and tired of you being in there. So you're all scrunched up. You're having a hard, it's not as comfortable as it used to be. It's really not. In fact, it might even seem like it's the end of the world to you, especially when you go into labor and it just seems like you're being smashed and crushed. And I hear that your first breath of air is as difficult as blowing up one of those clown balloons. Have you ever tried blowing up one of those balloons before it's been blown up once? Like, it's pretty hard. You got to push. Your little baby lungs have to push that much pressure per square inch to take their first breath of air, because up until then, they've just been breathing the amniotic fluid. Well, likewise, that first breath of air actually hurts, and it takes a lot of effort. So, and I've even heard it explained in psychology classes, albeit introductory psychology classes, that the first emotion we experience when we're born is disgust. Crazy to think about, but does anyone feel kind of gross right now? At least when we look at the meta consciousness of everything, it's getting kind of cramped and gross. And it doesn't really seem like we have a future. And it could be that the next future that we see, taking our first breath of air, could actually be really painful. Who knows what's outside? Do we know what considerations will be had when we become a spacefaring species? I mean, we're having a hard enough time cohabitating now. How are we going to be able to cohabitate on these little tin cans? Are we going to take plants with us? I certainly hope so. You can't have hanging plants in 0G. You have to have giant spinning cylindrical. I don't know if cylindrical is the word, but they got to actually be like giant rings in space. Rings like the ecliptic and the zodiac, just to get gravity, because of Newton's law, if you spin something fast enough, well, because acceleration is indistinguishable from gravity, you can create artificial gravity on a space station, and you could grow plants. So we could have plants in space. It does sound like I'm being an apologist for space, because I certainly want to be. I certainly hope that the Space Force doesn't lose their jungle survival training just because they're in space. I mean, they really should take the jungle with them. Well, how do you know that one day the space colonists don't revolt and they have to go back to jungle tactics, but it's all happening in a space dome? I can dream, can't I? So, speaking of dreamers, we'd like to move on to somebody we mentioned earlier, Laird Scranton. Now, Laird Scranton has a different method of uncovering meaning of hieroglyphs, citing that the Rosetta Stone is usually the beginning point for translators in the West, and says that a method of comparing parallel texts doesn't always render the correct meaning. Scranton prefers to compare parallel cosmologies and work from there. Much of his work involves comparing Dogon words and glyphs to Egyptian ones and finding remarkable similarities. The Dogon say something that's similar to Buddhist mythology, that there exist 7 pairs of universes, which of course makes 14 in total. Each one has a physical and a non-physical relationship. Scranton seems to think that based on the glyphs, the non-material universe has perfect knowledge, but an inability to act in the material universe, while the inhabitants of the material universe have imperfect knowledge, but more or less a full ability to act in the material universe. Scranton brings Einsteinian relativity into this by proclaiming the fact that time frame changes at different relative velocities may be one way of understanding this. For instance, if you had astronauts moving close to the speed of light, in the amount of time it would take them to tell us to take a sip of coffee, a whole day or even week might elapse for us. As such, if there are non-material beings, their perception of time might be instantaneous or all at once. And to retreat from pretending to know more about this topic than I do, we can at least agree that time does change a bit differently in the dream world. I have memories of being a kid and taking an hour-long nap and having a whole day pass in a dream. I don't think I'm the only one that's experienced this. I know from researching the puka, if you are abducted by the giant rabbit puka outside of the bar, he could hijack you for thousands of years and then drop you off not more than 5 feet from where he picked you up. And who's going to believe you? The whole rabbit, that's who. I'd love to have this guy on the show. Some of Laird Scranton's work reframes the wheel in the sky in a completely new way and introduces us to some concepts that are truly fascinating. I guess he was into this guy named Velikovsky when he was a kid. And Velikovsky wrote a very controversial book in the 50s. He was a contemporary of Einstein and worked with him to establish the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Velikovsky worked as a psychiatrist and studied under William Steckel, who himself was a learned student of Freud. Already a man of some renown when he published his works World in Collision, it caused a bit of good controversy, but it made it a bestseller. In short, Velikovsky was supposing ancient astrotheology by analyzing the ruins of ancient sites, comparing language and mythology, drawing conclusions from these instead of mathematics or astronomy directly. In short, he was a mind scientist putting his 2 cents in where one would normally not. Long and the short of it, Velikovsky was doing some historical research, studying ancient Egyptian records, and discovered something that sounded strongly reminiscent, at least to him, of the 10 biblical plagues of Egypt, the ones from the Old Testament. While looking at the historical data, Velikovsky concluded that this disaster would have likely affected the entire world, and not just the local geography. So he began looking into Mayan, Egyptian, and Chinese, etc. mythology, and basically came to the conclusion that they were all telling the same story. Around 1500 BC, it looked to him as if a giant comet had come close to Earth and caused a number of problems, the largest of which would be the eruption of volcano Thera in the Middle East, which subsequently caused even more problems. It starts to get truly interesting when the names used for this object are also later used to refer to Venus. The idea is simple, yet it's metal AF. Venus was a relatively new planet that began as a wandering comet within our solar system that wreaked havoc on a number of planets before finally settling into the orbit we are familiar with today. Astronomers, of course, well, they were outraged and boycotted Velikovsky and even railed against Macmillan to get the book pulled and barred from publishing. Velikovsky also correctly predicted, though, radioactivity should be detected on Jupiter, to which Einstein even pushed back and had to later recant his statements shortly before his death. It's even rumored that there was a copy of Worlds in Collision that lay open upon his desk when he died. Initially, before probes arrived, the prevailing theory was that Venus might even be habitable. It was thought of as a sister planet. People thought it would be like a tropical paradise, maybe just a little bit warmer because it was close to the sun, but nonetheless, a sister planet of Earth. But Velikovsky's predictions were accurate, that if it was a new planet, it would necessarily be pretty hot. When we arrived, we discovered the surface was hot enough to melt steel. The European Space Agency even discovered charged particles being ejected off the planet's night side, increasing as the orbit reached closer to the sun, essentially identifying this planet as having an old comet tail that might have even once been visible. It's recorded this way in some accounts. It's interesting to think that if Venus ever had a comet tail, it would appear to slither through the sky and may have at one point even been more visible than it is today, maybe even during the day. Some cultures record it alongside the sun and the moon as one of the major celestial objects. Interestingly, we have a hard time matching our predictions of Venus to ancient records, and even ancient records to themselves, specifically those of Ptolemy and Copernicus, which is somewhat shocking. It's even more shocking when you consider that this was the one planet they really got wrong. I mean, is that really possible that this is just the one planet they got wrong? The general consensus is thus. Velikovsky suggests as a wandering comet within our solar system, Venus pulled up a little too close to Earth, causing earthquakes and massive volcanic eruptions. Data from this period suggests it was an unusually active time for Earth, quaking and belching furiously all the time. So the eruption of Thera, the largest eruption on record, took out the Minoan Empire, the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, and corresponds to the exodus of the Hebrews with Moses from Egypt. Velikovsky suggests the pillar of smoke by day and fire by night was the volcanic activity, which might be to blame for some of the bizarre plagues like raining hail and the strange skin conditions that were suffered downwind. Other researchers have even suggested that because the firstborn children of Egypt slept on the floor, that it was a sort of gas that was released, a heavy gas that crawled along the floor and killed all the firstborns, relating that back to the catastrophe of the volcanoes again. Either way, Scranton does scratch his head a little bit, at least when questioned about the idea of social amnesia. Like, if this big thing happened, where is it on the record? Because if we look at the dates, we can see that it occurred like sometime in the age of Aries when all the war and the laws were going on. What Scranton does to prove his point is that early on in the history, it's referred to as a comet. There's much talk of a war in heaven, and there's even a little piece of Greek legend of Venus being born out of Jupiter's forehead. Now, he goes to one observation of Jupiter that seemed to show the core was twice as hot, but also twice as small as it was predicted to be. Scranton seems to think that dovetails with the idea that Venus may have been, through a cataclysmic event, through the ignition of Jupiter's core, been born and ejected from Jupiter's forehead, just like the myths, eventually to cause chaos on its way around the solar system to eventually settle down in the orbit that we see today. The thing that also suggests and gives some credence to this theory is how Venus seems to face us the exact same way every time it's close to us in an orbit. Sometimes this means that the two bodies have been close together. Either way, it is kind of strange. We know that the moon is the only body that's perfectly tidal locked to any other body in the solar system, and we seem to think that this is because that the moon was created during a collision with us. And I know I mentioned this on other podcasts, but in the Zodiac calendar, Venus is represented by a rabbit and is called Lamont, which somehow seems relevant considering Copernicus and Ptolemy can't agree on what Venus is doing because by everyone's calculations, it's hopping around and being a trickster. So maybe the Mayans were onto something. Maybe they knew that this planet moved irregularly compared to all the other ones in their regular orbit. Also, the rabbit is a symbol of generation and newness. So maybe they knew it was a new planet. Scranton even says that it's referred to as the newcomer in some mythologies. I don't really know where he's getting that, but I would love to figure out where he is getting that from, because I just love the idea that Venus could be like some newcomer that just like when it came in, it was like, hey, I'm here. And then like all these disasters happened because apparently it brought an end to the Minoan Empire. It's kind of a big deal. And I know that the Upanishads coming to India was a product of a movement and migration, a wisdom tradition coming from somewhere else. And that's where the caste system was derived from. I would love to do a whole episode on India. I always feel like we leave it for the end and then we never really quite get into it. But I did take a look at the Yuga cycle and I noticed some similarities in some lineups. For instance, the Golden Age seems to end around the time the Age of Gemini begins. Haha. What haters, right? Well, I mean, this makes some sense because Satya seems to be like these big, long golden ages, and I get a sense of slowness from them, and then they sort of speed up in Treta and Dwapara. Once again, I'm not an expert, but the movement from Satya to Treta, the golden age, to like a faster age, would be emblematic of languages being codified and more trade happening and expansion. According to this scheme, also, we should be coming out of the Kali Yuga, which is the age of iron and of violence. And supposedly we popped out of the Kali Yuga actually around 1700, which is funny because, you know, you have the birth of the United States of America, you have standardization, and the world starts to look more and more and more like a giant family. We undergo the Enlightenment. Human rights become more of a thing. We start to look at the world differently in a more progressive, spiritual way. We begin to value the human life more, every human life. Suddenly there's this thing about God-given rights, and I know at the time it said all men, but the general idea of all people being created equal, the church still takes issue with this idea today. So when Yuri Bezemov says our only hope is to return to traditional values, to return to the church, to return to God is the only way to save America, this is a sentiment you see echoed near the end of a Jordan Peterson speech. And I think that there's some technical picking around that needs to be done here. Let's start here. For instance, America was not founded on Christian values. It was founded on Masonic values. That's why there's separation of church and state. That's why there's no monarch. That's why the president doesn't speak for God. That's why neither does Congress or the court. All of those people are offices that are instituted by human beings that are considered to be flawed, but still contain within them enough of a spark of the divine to both carry out their office and for there to be a reason for the office to be carried out in the first place, because it's needed and everyone needs protection under the law, a system of law instead of a system of men. So when Yuri Bezemov says we should retreat back to the church, he's wearing that same exact smile that he was wearing when he was talking to those Indian poets, so on and so forth, when he was deceiving people. My point is this. So running back to our little denominational churches and depending on the Pope and all that, that's not going to fix anything. What we need to do is have faith in ourselves. There is an inherently occult Luciferic principle built into America. Just stop and put down your religious thought for 4 seconds and consider the fact that the people that came here, and I'm stealing this from Elon Musk, the people that came here were explorers, people that wanted a better life. And that goes for the people in the past and the people in the present as well. And so the people that are here carry within them a spirit of exploration, a spirit of independence, a spirit of believing in something better. And I can sit here and show you all the hidden meaning in The Shining about how the American dream is a lie, about how manifest destiny basically was our excuse of committing genocide against the people that were already living in their own golden era here. But still, even as such, it happened. And the world that we live in now is a better place because we believe and have stood for believing in the divinity that is inward in the human spirit and its own sovereignty within the earth and within its own body to be able to make decisions for itself and decide what's good for itself and its own destiny. And so I do disagree with Yuri Bezemov. Or maybe I don't. Maybe I'm saying Yuri Bezemov is telling us a half truth, because that's the most dangerous thing. The full truth, at least as far as I'm going to take an attempt at it, is that if we're going to return to our traditionalist values, we need to return to the rule of law. And what does that mean? That means negotiating. That means talking. That means interacting with each other as equals. Even between positions of authority. If you are a church leader or a president or anyone in between, you can still talk to people like an equal. It doesn't matter if you're poor or disenfranchised. I mean, I have a hard time just talking like a sane person to anybody. So we can all try a bit harder to acknowledge the divinity in other people, even as we administrate our offices of authority. Because if we return back to an authoritarian, patriarchal, religious monarchy, I mean, that was true for Russia. That's not true for us. We've never been a monarchy. We can't return to a monarchy. We're not going to live out Russia's story. We're going to live out our own. And so I think we should desperately avoid collectivism on both sides. I really do not want us to become some sort of weird replay of the past. What we're doing here is an experiment, and it's not guaranteed to succeed. So returning to the past is, for us, looking to the future. And if America wants to dig its heels into what made it great at some point, then we need to look towards the future. We need to reorient ourselves towards the stars. And that's how we should make our decisions. Honestly, that's what I think. But I'm just one person. It's in a democracy. It's a collection of voices. And you know what? I'll say this. As a Luciferian myself, I finally went and cracked open Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky. And you know what? I was sorely disappointed the same way you are going to be sorely disappointed if you like the way this conversation is going and would like to hear the extended show and are currently not a subscriber for $5. But if you would like to be, you could head on over to www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit and sign up and hear all our extended shows. You get some extra artwork and a whole bunch of other benefits, the best of which is access to our Discord server where you can chit chat with us, learn tarot cards. You'll be guaranteed to that if you subscribe to the higher tiers, but we'll talk about that later. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Head on over to www. Go do the thing. And with that in mind, eat carrots and shoot lasers.